Hi, and welcome everyone. We're just going to give everyone a few more minutes to log in and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome to National Transfer Week. My name is Kalani Rice. I'm with Arizona State University with Pathways for the Future Scholarship Program. And today we have a guest from Maricopa Community Colleges. We have Rojas. She's the Director for Curriculum and Transfer Articulation. She's going to be talking to us about prior learning assessments and how that can help students on their transfer journey. Because we are in a webinar setting, you won't be able to use the chat function, but we do encourage you to ask questions, and you can do so by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to the questions during the presentation, we'll have time directly after to answer any of your questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining today's transfer session. It's called Transfer Things, starring prior learning assessment and career and technical education. Session overview. This presentation is broken up into 3 chapters: building the case for prior learning assessment, CTE and PLA in action, and then moving from the why to the how, the steps to make PLA happen. The competencies we're hoping to achieve today is that you can critically examine how CTE and PLA can help you in your local context, as well as gain insight and strategies to support CTE and PLA learners. Chapter 1, building the case. So why are we talking about CTE and prior learning assessment? Well, the issue at hand is we have a new reality. And these are headlines from across the nation in terms of what is that reality that we're facing. We see that there's transfer student disparities. Nationwide, fewer high school seniors and graduates are choosing not to enroll in college. And then there's historical declines in higher education. Community colleges are struggling. There are some institutions that have seen enrollment increases, but by far and large, there are many institutions that are experiencing enrollment declines. And so we're hoping in today's conversation and in today's presentation that we have a truthful conversation of how we're meeting students where they're at in their educational journey, especially and specifically CTE students. So overall, what you're finding is that there's an increased learner disillusionment with traditional higher education. What I always say is that traditional higher education is not meeting the needs of a non-traditional learner. In addition, we're starting to see a parallel higher education system emerging. At least and over 60% of Americans say that they prefer to pursue non-degree options. We're seeing a rise in other educational platforms. And since 2020, over 20 million learners have joined Coursera. So you're starting to see that there are prospective learners who are choosing to start their educational path with non-traditional educator providers. So we really want to position ourselves to be able to welcome back these learners by onboarding them, utilizing this learning that is taking place in different formats. So here are career and technical education student journeys. If you work at a community college, this looks very familiar to you. At universities, you probably see these students as well. So we have 4 different scenarios. We have 4 friends who started their educational pathway in non-traditional formats. We have Will, who earns an industry recognized credential in high school, Mike, who does an apprenticeship and earns an employer certification, and then Dustin, who is out or displaced worker, loses his manufacturing job. And then we have Luke, who joins the Army and earns military credit. So these 4 friends want to return to school and get an associate degree, but they want to leverage their previous learning in the areas that they pursued prior to entering traditional higher education. So here enters L, or 11, who created a prior learning assessment program at Hawkins Community College to help these 4 friends access a credential and then transfer to a university. So we're going to cover CTE stigmas because I think that they still exist, and we need to dispel and promote CTE students as college-going students. So in the past, CTE students were seen as non or not college material. The CTE programs seem and often were looked at as outdated, lacking in rigor. And then commonly, when you talk to individuals about CTE, they think about shop classes, home ec, and basket weaving. For the community colleges, we often hear occupational courses do not transfer. For Arizona specifically, if you go into our online course equivalency guide, you could see that there's hundreds of courses labeled occupational that have an NT, non-transferable value. So what message does that send to transfer students? If they're earning the learning and they're successfully completing it and they're paying for college level courses and they're seeing that their courses are non-transferable, then how is that on their confidence and their appetite to want to pursue higher education? So that's something that we need to grapple with and provide solutions for. In addition, I keep coming across catalogs and universities and community colleges that still view the Associate in Applied Science as a terminal degree. And so that's another message that we need to change, because these are college-going students and they are transfer students. And if we want to create an equitable transfer experience for these students, then the messaging definitely needs to change. For CTE pathways, it's often seen as leading to low wage jobs, when the research and literature is basically saying, no, actually, they're leading to high wage jobs, and that these students are successful in their careers. And so we want to create these entry and access points. So even if they go into a high wage career, perhaps they want to return to school. And so we need to identify those ways of being able to onboard them by leveraging their prior learning assessment and then providing them with the new learning. So the bottom line is CTE students are often left out of the national transfer agenda and conversation. So we need to basically learn more about these students and have intentional conversations in developing intentional strategies to be able to onboard them to pathways. So in addition to the reality of CTE students, we're seeing that they do want to go to college. So they are college material, and that CTE is college prep. Over 75% of students taking concentration in CTE courses are accessing post-secondary education. CTE brings relevance to education, helping students connect to what they learn, often making them very successful, even more successful than non-CTE students. And then 91% of high school grads who earn at least 2 to 3 CTE credits enroll in college and are likely not to take remedial education as their peers. So again, this is just a couple of data points to say, you know, this counteracts the stigmas that in previous year higher education had about CTE students. So let's level set. What is prior learning assessment? Many of us probably have heard about prior learning assessment, or PLA, or we have some sort of mechanism or policy related to PLA. So to level set and to set the table for the rest of the presentation, what we're talking about is college level verifiable learning that takes place in many environments. Institutions should equitably recognize learning wherever it occurs. And so that students do not have to repeat competencies that they've already mastered. So recognition of learning that creates equality, no matter what the modality is. And so when we talk about prior learning assessment, especially when we have conversations with our faculty who do the evaluation, we really emphasize that the focus should be on the what and not the who and the where. Oftentimes we get fixated on how the learning was earned or who taught the learning and where the learning occurred. But when we're talking about prior learning assessment, it should be focused on the learning itself. So the what, the content. And so as we're having this conversation, I do want to keep emphasizing that it's on the what. So again, when we talk about prior learning assessment, there's various methods and types. Traditionally, we know about standardized exams. Many of us have probably worked with our community colleges and our local feeder high schools in trying to establish equivalencies related to standardized exams. I know in Arizona, in our Arizona transfer system, we work with our university partners to standardize decisions so that students who are transferring aren't going to face any complications. Back in the day, probably about 10, 15 years ago, when we weren't doing this, a lot of the transfer issues that bubbled up really came down to standardized exams because there was a mismatch of scores when students would transfer with AP CLEP. They were often told by the university that it was non-transferable, but to the student who successfully completed that and got credit at the community college, they didn't understand that. So Arizona really worked hard to move in a direction to be able to work with the universities to standardize these decisions, to build that trust and transparency to help these transfer students. So what we're advocating in this webinar and this session is to do the same with prior learning assessment. So taking it a step further. So challenge department exams. Community colleges should be talking to their university partners about accepting decisions related to these exams, workplace experiences, also decisions related to industry recognized credentials. This is a growing need in the high school districts. And as we go through the presentation, I'll give you specific examples of how a community college can onboard high school students leveraging industry recognized credentials, as well as a university. If you have a direct entry student from a high school, you could be utilizing this strategy as well. Many of us already recognize military credit, but we should be working with our partnerships, our articulation partnerships, to make sure that the decisions made at one institution are being recognized and honored at the receiving institution. So in addition to that, there's the ed platforms that I had covered previously. We're seeing Coursera, study.com, Straighter Line to mention a few, as well as what we prefer or what we refer to as transfer credit from both regional and national. So Maricopa really defines transfer credit from another receiving institution as prior learning assessment, since it took place outside of our education environment. So why PLA? We're setting the context that it's a student success strategy. So when we talk about students who bring in prior learning assessment, we see a 17% increase in completion. So I don't know any institution that doesn't want to move the needle with completion, retention, persistence, especially where there's disparities in the college going experience and rates. In addition, it saves individuals time and money. Again, in a reality of students who basically see a higher education as unaffordable, they can leverage prior learning assessment to make it affordable, to make it cost effective. So students who are pursuing prior learning assessment save time and money. So you could see those statistics right there. Institutions also benefit from having prior learning assessment students because, again, they're retained at higher rates and their completion rates go up. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. This is, again, I don't know any institution that doesn't have a DEI strategy or agenda. Prior learning assessment lends itself very well to it because it creates an equitable platform for students coming into community college and the university. So where there's an emphasis on dual enrollment, prior learning assessment is really leveraging the industry recognized credentials and standardized exams that the students are earning in high school. So not everybody can afford dual enrollment, but there are a number of students who are achieving industry recognized credentials that could serve as a college prep and onboard students onto pathways. It recognizes diversity of learning experiences and achievements. It also provides inclusion. So you're including a population of students who otherwise have been left out of the conversation, have been left out of strategic enrollment plans. And so you're really building an inclusion strategy to make sure that these prospective learners are getting the same experiences, the same services, and the same process of evaluation. And then also in some of the prior learning assessment opportunities, they include civic engagement, service learning, work-based learning experiences. Again, diversifying learning and then meeting the students where they're at and then leveraging them on so that they can achieve more credentials. And then ultimately, PLA principles are similar to transfer articulation. So we're all transfer advocates. We're here to talk about transfer. It's National Transfer Week. So how is PLA similar to transfer? Well, the principles are the same in the fact that the students shouldn't have to repeat competencies already earned, regardless of the modalities. In addition, it creates an equitable evaluation process for students who are interested in transferring. So there's an evaluation process at the sending institution as well as the receiving institution. Transfer articulation process should be efficient, transparent, and predictable. Prior learning assessment, that's the same intent and goal, is to provide an efficient, transparent process for students who are interested in pursuing prior learning assessment. In addition, articulation is built on standards and trust, similar to the principles of prior learning assessment. That's why it's very important to have that conversation and build that conversation with your university partners, because it is about building a scaffold of trust and transparency. Because we're not trying to hide this credit, we're really trying to build transparency, letting the universities know that we're doing these evaluations and these decisions are being made by our faculty, similar to the faculty who are making transfer credit decisions. So chapter 2, how do we make CTE and PLA and put it into action? So at the Maricopa Community Colleges, and this is something, if you're either in the state of Arizona or if you're out of state, this is a strategy that you could use in your local context. For Arizona, specifically for the Maricopa Community Colleges, we're working with the Arizona Department of Education and our local high school feeder schools to conduct curriculum alignment. So working with our faculty to review high school curriculum, to identify a cluster of Maricopa courses that could potentially articulate. In addition, we're examining the high school programs, generating a list of technical education programs to begin, again, looking at the alignment, sharing this information with key stakeholders in our college to figure out how we could better streamline that intake process from the high schools, and again, onboard them to guided pathways. We're also looking at high school certificates to see if there's any opportunities or solutions for us to leverage these certificates. So again, we're looking at that, generating a list so that we can have an informed conversations. The focus of this presentation is prior learning assessment. So we're identifying the list of industry recognized credentials for our faculty to review to see if it's eligible for college credit. And you could go, whether you're in Arizona, to the Department of Education, Arizona Department of Education, or even if you're out of state, go to your state Department of Education, and they'll have this information available on the site. It will have the list of the approved industry recognized credentials that are available to high school students. And it even has completion rates and rates of the number of students pursuing these credentials. And then you could begin prioritizing your efforts to say, okay, if we're seeing that the majority of students are pursuing CompTIA, then we're going to put that on the top of our list with our faculty to be able to streamline that review, and then hopefully it results in credit. And then for Maricopa, we're leveraging all of this to increase our completion rate. So for the community colleges, specifically Maricopa Community College, we underwent the 4DX, and part of our big WIG, our wildly important goal, is to increase completion rates and to also increase our transfer rate. So this is one strategy to be able to do that, to really understand the high school learning experience, to see how we could better serve our secondary partners. Now, even though this focus right now of this slide is high school to community college, our university partners need to be working with us in tandem, because it's a pipeline, it's a spectrum. So if we're leveraging all these strategies, we want to make sure that our university partners are aware of what we're doing, and then working alongside us to make sure that if they go on to a bachelor's degree, that this type of credit is not going to be challenged and it's not going to be denied because of how the learning and the credit was achieved. So to get down even to more specifics, as I had mentioned in the previous slide, this is just the A's, half the list of what's offered in the high school that's recognized. This is the approved CTED list that are credentials and certifications that are available to high school students. So there is an incentive program for Arizona and Perkins money that is attached to that, to really incentivize high school districts to provide these certifications, and there's funding attached to that. So again, we're seeing many students who are encouraged to complete these certifications. So we know that this exists, and it would behoove us to not try to figure out solutions to recognize this credit. To go on further, as we're leveraging prior learning assessment, we want to align it to pathways. So this is just one example. In working with NAU, we have identified Empire CAT training, and we evaluated that training, and there's credit that results from that training that can be applied to our organizational management degree. And then to take it even further, NAU has a 90-30 program, a BIS in industrial leadership, that a student can leverage not only their prior learning assessment, but 90 community college credits, and then take 30 credits at the university. So what a significant cost savings for a student to have this pathway that leverages and even saves them even more money from recognizing that prior learning assessment, and then being able to offer them 90 community college credits at the university, and then only 30 community college credits, 30 credits at the NAU. So when we talk about PLA in action, there's a reality there. There's years and years of PLA bias. And so if you're looking to explore prior learning assessment strategy or program, or you want to scale up, many of you have probably come across these challenges and concerns. So number one, for a community college, it's transferability. So when we have questions and having conversations with our faculty about, hey, this is the direction we need to go, we need to really expand decisions related to prior learning assessment. The number one question that comes up is, will the universities take it? Will it transfer to the universities? Because aren't we doing a disservice to students if we're giving them credit and the universities are not taking it? And what I tell them is, we're working on it. We're bringing along our university partners to ensure that this credit is accepted and applied in the transfer pathway. But I also challenge them to think about it this way. Maricopa can't guarantee that Maricopa's college algebra course will transfer to BYU or UCLA or to any other higher education, but we don't discourage students from completing and pursuing college algebra. Just like with PLA, we can't guarantee that it will be accepted, but we shouldn't discourage students from pursuing prior learning assessment opportunities. In addition, there's these, again, long standing stigmas and bias about prior learning assessment is that there's no rigor, the fear is loss of control over the curriculum, and then there's competition. If I give a student prior learning assessment credit, then they're not going to take my class. Well, in the previous slide, we saw that no, if they're awarded prior learning assessment, they're going to take more classes, they're going to complete degrees, and ultimately it's a win-win for the students. In addition, there's concerns about impact accreditation, but there's literature and research that basically says no. Many of you go across the regional accrediting bodies, they basically encourage it in terms of meeting the students and leveraging prior learning assessment. Essentially, they just say it has to be verifiable and it needs to be documented and it has to be consistent. In addition, I hear it a lot in terms of seat time versus content learned. And working with my institution to help them and engage them in a prior learning assessment conversation, there was concerns about, wait a minute, if a student completed this in 2 weeks, but it takes my student 8 to 16 weeks, how do I know that the content was covered, right? So we really basically say, again, focus on the what and not the modality and how fast the learning occurred or who taught the learning and where it was achieved at. So we really try to work with our faculty to help them understand that it's about competencies, it's about achievement, and figuring out solutions on how to recognize that. And I think overall, it's just a lack of familiarity and understanding of what we're talking about. And really, it takes a lot of engagement for key stakeholders at an institution to bring up and scale out a prior learning assessment plan and infrastructure. So chapter 3, how to be an 11. So in our very first slide, we talked about Elle, who created a prior learning assessment program at her institution. And so moving from that why to the how. And so I think that this will probably be kind of, I think the crux of the presentation is, okay, Rose, we got it, we buy in, we see the value, the need, but how do you do it? So institutionally, and this is from experience and a lot of research and working with other institutions, but what I would encourage you to do is start by analyzing your CTE secondary and post-secondary infrastructure. So what are you currently doing right now to meet the needs of the CTE students? And if you're not meeting the needs, then what do you need to do? Who needs to be involved in that conversation? So it would be great to do a kind of a self-assessment to say, all right, is our institution really positioned and do we have the infrastructure to successfully support CTE and prior learning assessment? So part of that would be engaging your high school, your CTEDs, those are the career and technical education districts, as well as your community college and university partners and staff, right? So really having this pipeline conversation of how can we do things better? If we're not meeting the students right now, how can we work together collaboratively to make sure that we're providing an equitable transfer experience, whether from the high school to the community college to the university? I would encourage you to take a look at your policies and your practices and benchmark that next to best practices nationally. That takes a lot of work, but there's a lot of literature that basically puts it right out there to say, here are, exceptional North Star institutions that are doing this very well, that are maximizing CTE and prior learning assessment. But I think it would be good to inform your internal stakeholders of what your peer institutions are doing. In state for the universities, I know that there could be ASU, NAU, and U of A participants on this call, is really taking a look at your feeder community colleges to say, what are you doing related to CTE and prior learning assessment? And then aligning those efforts so that you can help credit mobility by either replicating or honoring what's going on. I would encourage you to obviously expand institutional methods to scale out prior learning assessment, and then creating clear and transparent business processes so that you could make sure that internal stakeholders can see exactly what exists. External, like your accrediting bodies, have access to your clear and transparent business processes, as well as your university partners, so that they know that this is built off of rigor, faculty decision-making, faculty involvement, and faculty engagement. And then also a baseline data report, because again, we're always like looking for that information of like, okay, well, how many CTE students are we talking about? How many people are bringing in prior learning assessment? But if you don't have a baseline data report, it's really hard to gather that information and to present that to key decision makers. So I would encourage you to work with the relevant and appropriate people to create that baseline report so that you can measure CTE and PLA and then use that report to scale out. Institutionally, I would say use this prior learning assessment as an early college strategy, whether it's dual enrollment and looking at your dual enrollment catalog, whether it's expanding decisions related to standardized exams. And then in previous slide, you could see that it could be a strategic enrollment strategy to leverage industry recognized credentials. In addition, I would say that once you make those decisions, then create the resources and the tools that would help students better decide on which pathway they should pursue. So taking those decisions and aligning it with fields of interest. Many of you are probably familiar with guided pathways and the strategies related to guided pathways, building with the end in mind. And then it's also leverages fields of interest. So what we're doing at Maricopa is we're aligning our dual enrollment catalog and decisions related to prior learning assessment, and then we're putting them in the fields of interest buckets so that students know exactly what field of interest is most applicable to their pursuits, and then from that field of interest, what guided pathways are available to them. In addition, backwards mapping. So we could, as you're having those conversations, whether or not you're pursuing guided pathways or even pathways into a community college or transfer, take a look at it and with the lens of creating entry points, utilizing prior learning assessment. So how can you weave in industry, micro-credentials, stackable credentials, or work-based learning experience into a guided pathway, leveraging, not only high school experiences, but prospective learning experience from adult learners. We haven't really placed an emphasis on adult learners, but we all know that that's the new norm. That's the new learner, is the adult student. And so all of this could benefit not only high school students, but the adult learner as well. I would encourage you to build a community of allies, because you're going to, if you're pursuing prior learning assessment, and in my experience, you're going to come across some adversaries, some entities and individuals that don't believe in prior learning assessment because it's non-traditional, it doesn't occur in a classroom seat. And so you need to build that community of allies, and that could be external entity, it could be nonprofit entities, Center for Future of Arizona, Education Forward. They're all PLA advocates. They can help you in those conversations to move the needle, to help you make advancements. In other states, you want to identify those nonprofits who have the mission of increasing attainment, access, and completion. So you want to leverage those individuals and those entities to help you with your conversation and your PLA pursuits. And then there's also kind of, in scaling it up, is really offering ongoing professional development, crosswalks, utilizing market research, and message testing. So this is all when you're further along in your PLA pursuits. You want to make sure that there's an ongoing strategy to make sure that it's sustainable and that you can grow this program. And then obviously with any initiative, you want to communicate. And that's just not only with internal individuals, but with your university partners and vice versa. If universities are building prior learning assessment, and they have a robust infrastructure, then help your community college partners, help them leverage that and be able to build up and scale up so that, you have that consistent and that streamlined process for students, whether or not they start at a community college, end up at a university, or end up at a university, but then drop out and go to their local community college. You want to, again, have those conversations. And then just further along with the community college and the university partnerships, include this in your, include CTE and PLA in your transfer strategy. So Maricopa just reviewed our university transfer partnership model. And as part of that, we have criteria in which we enter into partnerships with. Not only do we have that, we also have an evaluation process that we utilize to see whether or not a partnership is successful. So once we did this review, we wanted to make sure we're incorporating CTE and PLA in that transfer strategy and in our transfer agreements so that we can confidently ensure that CTE students and students who earn PLA credit basically have that reassurance that we worked with this university, we have an agreement that says that they will honor these decisions. So we're revamping our MOU to include prior learning assessment. We hadn't done that before. We will have sessions with our university partners to basically say that we are moving towards this direction. We have this in our criteria and that we will be including this in our MOU. So you want to build that in formally and informally. Also, you want to, again, work with your feeder high schools and high demand CTE fields. You want to create those CTE pathways with compatible university degrees. So helping those transfer students understand what's the best pathway if you want to transfer that will maximize the most credit to your university degree. In addition, like I said, you want to make sure that PLA is part of your articulation agreements. In order for you to hold your partner institutions accountable and vice versa, you want to make sure that it's solidified and codified in your articulation agreements. And then you want to create with your university partners success metrics. So again, you could report out success institutionally. And then if you're a state, if you're participating in a statewide transfer system, then it would be in your best interest as a state to work together to create those success metrics so that you're reporting as a state. Because I will tell you sooner than later, we've all seen the case, especially with transfer, that when a legislator has a son or daughter, or they see a report that basically says that we're denying credit based off of how credit was earned, or that we're not working together and recognizing prior learning assessment where other institutions and other states are, then all of a sudden we're going to be told how to do it. So it's in our best interest to proactively work towards creating a system that we're not comfortable with, but that will support the success of our students. And then help remove the stigmas about CTE and prior learning assessment. So we went over the stigmas that currently exist, the misperceptions about prior learning assessment, applied associate degrees and occupational courses, serving on national advisory boards and doing national presentations. It is very disheartening to hear that those stigmas are still in existence, and that CTE occupational students are still treated in a fashion that they're secondary and they're second thought students. And so again, we need to move towards creating an equitable experience, whether from high school to transfer to a university. And then, so I'll just kind of pause there. I know that there was a lot of information, but I wanted to hear whether or not there was questions. There are a few more slides, but really to see whether or not you have questions. Are there PLA options available and promoted as a key part of your degree programs and transfer pathways? Are CTE and PLA part of your partner and statewide transfer conversations? So I really want to hear from you in terms of like what's burning on your mind, what up to this point do you have questions about, or even comments and thoughts? So it looks like it says no open questions, but I'll give you a time. Is there an opportunity for people to come off the mic?
Unfortunately, there's not.
Okay.
If you do have a question or even a statement, you can use the Q&A feature. That
Okay.
should be located at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. So we'll just go over the last remaining slides. So just institutional reflection questions. I'll leave you with this. I'm assuming that these presentations will be available to you after, as well as the recorded webinar. But to take this back to your institution, gather a group of key stakeholders. It's always good to start with leadership, to say, you know, I attended Transfer Week, and there was really a few presentations that focused on CTE and prior learning assessment. And this is something that our institution should pursue. So this is just reflective questions to have with those key stakeholders of what is your institution doing? Are you, redressing these longstanding policies and traditional practices that aren't meeting the needs of these non-traditional students? Are you really doing all you can to onboard high school students, not only in dual enrollment, but in other opportunities that the high school students have? Are you leveraging that to help them be successful in their college going pursuits? And then also creating these equitable access across the spectrum, utilizing CTE and academic pathways. So the focus in my experience has always been on academic pathways, liberal arts, but really balancing it out to say, these are all prospective learners, they're all prospective students. And so the evaluation, learning experience, and transfer experience is equitable across all pathways. And then in summary, prior learning assessment can increase degree and certificate completion. It's built on trust and collaboration, blanket denial of credit, whether it's earned from a nationally accredited institution to a prior learning assessment. It creates barriers to interinstitutional mobility. Prior learning assessment is an equalizer. It creates equitable access and affordability for students. And a one-size-fits-all traditional approach for awarding credit is not working for all learners. So it's time to make PLA a reality. So I'll just leave you with this. These are just a few resources. So based off of the content in this presentation, based off the research that I've done, Kathy Silberman and Kathy works at ASU. We contributed a book chapter, The Transfer Experience. It highlights pretty much everything that we've highlighted here in this presentation, but it has additional recommendations as well as a self-assessment for prior learning assessment. And all these organizations and entities are really trying to move the transfer agenda, increase those transfer rates. And so I would encourage you to go out there and learn more. Many of these have distribution lists or listservs that you could come apart and really receive ongoing updates of being a CTE advocate as well as a prior learning assessment advocate. So these are just a few resources that I have to offer you. And then my contact information, if you want to continue the dialogue, if you want more resources, or even if you want more technical details. I know this was a higher level, building the case, building the value, and then also kind of those higher level strategies. But if you want to dig down deeper and find out more technical details of how to make prior learning assessment work, or if you're in prior learning assessment and you want to just really kind of compare policies and practices, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm a big advocate of CTE and prior learning assessment and also transfer. I've been working in transfer for 20 years. And so all of this is coming together in our new reality to help students to meet them where they're at in their educational pathway. So I'll take a look. I think I have a question, so I'll take a look to see. Okay, so that's a very good question. The question is, thank you for presenting. If our institution is moving forward with challenge exams, how are faculty compensated for their time? And so Maricopa is just barely getting into the challenge exams arena. There have been in the past instances where a faculty member did create a challenge exam, but they did that on their own. They did that because they were seeing a series of students that were coming in with the same credentials, with the same learning. And so they stepped up and they created the exam, and that currently is in existence. But we know that we want to scale up department exams. And so we want to create a equitable prior learning assessment compensation structure for faculty. So we're just beginning to have those conversations. I'm trying to do the research in other states and other institutions to see how they're doing it. SUNY Empire State is a leader in prior learning assessment. They would be a good contact for you to get in touch with. If you want that contact, I could provide that to you if you reach out to me. But we haven't scaled out department exams. That's something that we want to do, but we're just not far along enough in the process to do it. I would tell you, I think it was David. It took us, Maricopa, a good 6 years just to get to the point of developing the business processes, the policies, and barely a very simple infrastructure to support prior learning assessment. But, you know, next year, we're hoping that we'll have more information to share with you about not only department exams, but even portfolio assessment. So thank you for the question, and thank you for attending the session. Any other questions, comments? I'll just give it another second in case somebody's typing. I don't want to hold up anybody, but if there's, you know, not any questions for the good of the group.
Thank you so much, Rose, for presenting this valuable information, and thank you all for joining today.
Thank you. Make prior learning assessment happen.